This podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. I know what many of you are thinking. Why pay for a course when I can watch a PowerPoint presentation and get free CEUs through my employer? But how many times do you leave energized or equipped with the latest evidence and even a game plan for how to better serve your patients the next day? Check out Great Seminars and Books and one of their many courses ranging from total joint arthroplasty to comprehensive rehab strategies for the geriatric patient. See how you can get $25 off a live course by going to seniorrehabproject.com/great. Hit me.
This is a senior rehab podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
Hello, friends. I hope this finds you doing well. Today's show is all about blood flow restriction training. If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard about BFR, blood flow restriction training. It is being utilized with the military, with a lot of athletes at any level, but it's also starting to be utilized with older adults. The person kind of leading the charge is Johnny Owens. He owns Owens Recovery Science, and he was a guest on the podcast way back when, towards the beginning. And a lot has happened since then. So he has a couple faculty members, Kyle Kimbrell and Ben Weatherford. They're faculty for Owens Recovery Science. Super down-to-earth guys, but very, very smart, and they were super helpful in this conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it. But before we get into the convo, I do want to mention the Geriatric PT Essentials. So the Game Changers, the paid group for SRP, came together and talked about what are the essentials for geriatric physical therapy, and then we voted on our top 4, and we made a PDF. So if you want to see what these essentials are for geriatric physical therapy, just go to seniorrehabproject.com and look at the bar at the top of the page, and you can submit your email address and get that free download. So I wanted to mention that before the interview, but without further ado, Kyle Kimbrell and Ben Weatherford with Owens Recovery Science. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for your download. Today's episode is all about blood flow restriction training. If you have been listening to this podcast for a while, my first guest was Johnny Owens. He is the owner, the founder, the creator of Owens Recovery Science. But I have two people that are working with him that are probably more intellectual, better looking, and just better people in general than Johnny Owens himself. So these two gentlemen I have with me, first one is Kyle Kimbrell, who happens to be my doppelganger as well. He is a native of Pasadena, Texas, and like any self-respecting Texan, he'll find a way to work Texas into his conversations. He moved to Southern California 13 years ago to work in an outpatient orthopedic private practice. Professionally, he's a credentialed clinical instructor and a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Over the last 2 years, he's been working closely with Johnny Owens and Ben Weatherford to spread the gospel of blood flow restriction to practicing clinicians as Owens Recovery Science's West Coast clinical educator. Kyle, cheers, buddy.
Cheers, my man.
What are you drinking?
That is an Institution Ales White Walls. It's a white IPA from the local brewery that's right next door to the clinic.
That's dangerous.
That is very dangerous. Yes.
All right. So next to you on the computer screen, we have Ben Weatherford. He graduated with his DPT from the University of the Incarnate Word School of Physical Therapy in 2015. He spent 14 weeks as an intern under the infamous Johnny Owens at the Center for the Intrepid. While at CFI, he was fully immersed in the development and implementation of blood flow restriction, rehabilitation protocols, and clinical applications. He assisted with the Return to Run clinical pathway for wounded service members, and he is currently the Director of Business Development for Owens Recovery Science. Additionally, he's a clinical instructor for BFR continuing education and a rehabilitation consultant to professional and collegiate sports teams. Ben, cheers, sir.
Cheers.
What are you drinking? You got a cup of coffee or something? What is that?
I've actually got the hot tea going. I'm getting off back-to-back trips to Fargo and Indianapolis, so I'm fighting off a little cold.
Oh my, you're such a sweetheart for taking the time to.
I thought that's what bourbon was for.
Yeah, exactly.
that introduction makes me sound way too serious after Kyle's.
I know, I love it.
I should have taken that another direction altogether.
Yeah, exactly. So before we kind of dive into this conversation, Kyle, how are your Cubbies doing so far?
Oh my God. Listen, can I tell you, the Cubs, they basically have ruined my life. I hated the Cubs before hating the Cubs was cool. I grew up in Houston, and my uncle was with the Astros for like 36 years, right? So I'd go to all kind of games. Cubs come to town. They're always better than us, and they beat up on us, and there's Cub fans everywhere. So all you hear as a little kid is the Cub fans cheering, and you don't really understand what's going on. And so they just completely ruined my childhood. Therefore, I hate them. I've hated them my whole life.
Fair enough.
Sort of.
All right. So blood flow restriction training. I would like to hear both of you all. Let's say you are at your local Kroger or Piggly Wiggly's, Costco, whichever grocery store that you go to, and someone asks you, "What do you do?" And they see the Owens Recovery Science shirt that you're wearing. What do you tell them? We'll start with you, Ben, and then Kyle can follow.
Yeah, I mean, I usually just talk about how it compares to traditional lifting of weights. I mean, because everyone seems to have a little bit of an understanding of lifting weights, even people that don't have any kind of medical inclination. So we teach people how to utilize a tourniquet system to recreate what happens when we lift heavy weight, but using the light weights that are available to us in rehab. So just keeping it as simple as I can. That's typically the way I go.
Awesome. What about you, Kyle?
I tell them, let's make every day leg day. Because we can get similar results to lifting heavy versus by lifting light and using this restrictive device. We know there's not a lot of muscle damage, if any, probably not any. We've got studies showing not. And then you typically kind of going to relate it to age-related changes, loss of muscle mass, the rehab client, the problems we see with them and losing muscle mass, or just loading heavy so that they can get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, you just try to meet them on their level. It's just like if it's somebody in the community, it's just like a patient's in front of you, and you got to kind of figure out, well, where are they at? What kind of an understanding do they have? And how do I put it into words that they can understand, and hopefully they end up in the clinic,
Yeah. And I do want to bring up that Kyle here sent me a bunch of videos and pictures for the CSM presentation, because I reached out to John. He said, "Hey, who's working with older adults with this stuff?" And Kyle. And so thank you for that. I mean, you sent some awesome stuff, but I would love for you to hit on that. It seemed like it was like one or two patients you took a bunch of videos and pictures of.
Right.
Could you kind of give us the story of that patient and what it was like to utilize BFR in their rehab process? Like, and was it a difficult thing for the patient to buy into, or just kind of how did that whole interaction go?
Well, yeah, there were a couple guys. One has an arthritic knee. He had meniscectomy and chondroplasty, and just having a hard time getting back his function, losing some of that extension that we see with that arthritic knee. And so we started him on BFR. I think we got it somewhere around the time I was rehabbing him. So I kind of started him midstream. And fortunately, he's a guy I knew pretty well and just a really agreeable and exercise in the past, that sort of thing. And so when we started working with him and he started feeling that lactate buildup in his quad and just getting that fatigue in his limb, it was really exciting for him because he hadn't felt that way in a long time because that knee had been bugging him. And so I actually had him just I called him and said, "Hey man, would you be willing to come by and I can just shoot some video and pictures of you?" And he said, "Absolutely, of course." And that was the guy that said, "Old not weak to you. I'm 74 or whatever. Old not weak." And so that was pretty funny. He had a good time with that. But he saw his strength kind of coming back and was able to get around and do things that he was having a hard time getting to when we were just kind of doing the traditional rehab stuff. The other fella, I actually started that on him. He was a post-op total knee, and we started that day one with him. He a guy I had treated in the past for a hip and another total knee. So he kind of had that experience of going through the traditional total knee rehab without BFR and then doing it with BFR. And he came to the clinic because another friend of his had been doing it at the clinic, and so he knew us, but he also knew we were doing BFR. So he came in expecting to do it. And it kind of blew his mind that first day when all of a sudden his quad's tired and he's got this big zipper on his knee and he's thinking, I can't do crap with this. And here we smoke his quad. So that was pretty fun to kind of see him through the whole process and see how he recovered. And he was in today. He's about done with us. So.
Wow. And I knew that, like that last patient, that's very pertinent to a lot of the people that listen to this podcast. I know me as well, because the amount of home health referrals that we're getting for post-ops, especially total knees, total hips, is dramatically increasing, especially with the bundled payments that are rolling out, across the country. So yeah, I think that is very pertinent to a lot of the listeners. So Ben, when Kyle uses blood flow restriction in that patient that just had a total knee replacement, what's going on? Why? Yeah, just kind of give us the laydown of what happens whenever we do restrict blood flow and take someone through some Therex.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that go on from a physiology standpoint that really can help us, and the end result that we're looking for really is a change in protein synthesis. So whenever we have an acute injury or we're acute post-op, protein synthesis changes within the limb that's affected. If we're in a period of decreased use or non-weight bearing, protein synthesis goes down within that limb, and that's really what leads to that atrophy and loss. So we need some pretty substantial or stressful exercise to really change that protein synthesis. And typically our light load doesn't get us there. So it seems like getting anaerobic, getting that big lactate and hydrogen response that we get from heavy load is a big part of changing that and turning on protein synthesis. So you use this tourniquet system to restrict blood flow into the limb, and we're taking away some oxygen, just like your body naturally does when you lift heavy weight. You lift heavy, your muscle contracts around the arteries, you occlude blood flow into the limb, you get out of that Krebs cycle and into the Corey cycle, all that fun physiology that everyone thought they could leave behind in undergrad.
Dang it.
Yeah, it comes back again. We get into that Corey cycle, and we start to build up this lactate and hydrogen, and you have these afferent nerve fibers in the muscle just there to measure acidity. And once we get to a certain threshold of acidity, it tells the brain, okay, we're doing something really hard right now, because your brain doesn't know if you're lifting 500 pounds, if you're running from a dinosaur, or if you have 5 pounds on your leg with a tourniquet on. It just knows that you're really anaerobic and really acidic, so we must be doing something really hard. So that kind of signals the brain to release some of these anabolic factors that help with hypertrophy and strength gains without that big mechanical tension on the limb. So we're staying within all those post-op precautions and things like that.
Yeah. What I'd like to hear both of your all's thoughts on this. What have you found in terms of the physician PT team? Have you seen a lot of physicians get on board with this? Do you see more physicians recommended that the PTs do it, or is it more the PTs find out about BFR and then they go talk to their physician that they commonly work with? Because like when Kyle talks about, post-op day 1, we're doing BFR, the first thing I thought of was like, man, I wonder who that doctor is. That's saying like, yeah, let's do this. So yeah, Ben, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing more and more of the physicians coming around. I mean, I'm not working in the clinic right now, so I don't have physicians that I'm working with on a daily basis. But when Johnny really was scaling this up in the military setting, and my limited time there with him, all those physicians are really in tune with what's going on the rehab side and very supportive of this application. So that was really helpful to have them just feel very comfortable with it and comfortable with us starting and being aggressive with the rehab. And we're seeing that more and more on the outpatient side from a lot of the folks that I've talked to, that I've done these courses with. They're starting to get these referrals specifically for BFR. The physicians are the ones asking for it to be there in these protocols post-op and even after some of the acute injuries. So Kyle can probably speak more to that since he's in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you say, Red Beard?
Nice. Hey, your wife already said I have an epic beard, so my day.
She did. She did. That is now on the record.
Epic beard. I think we need like a beard PT hashtag or something.
There is hashtag beards of
Hashtag
PT.
beard PT.
I think Kyle Ridgway and Rich Severin are behind.
Oh, right on. I'm not sure how I'm not a part of that by now. On the physician side of things, it's been interesting. Like the orthopedists, when they hear about it, they tend to not really be terribly concerned about much because they throw tourniquets on guys in the OR and inflate them to full occlusion or beyond, and they leave them inflated for 2 to 3 hours while they do surgery. So it tends to not really even, they don't tend to bat an eye at it. They just kind of go, oh yeah, all right, well, okay. Some of them will have some advanced questions, trying to think of more, they're going to be more on the kind of the incision side of things in terms of what they might be concerned with. So you kind of want to make sure that incision is well on its way to healing, if not fully healed, especially those bigger incisions like the total knee. When that guy came to my clinic, he was 3 weeks post-op. I think his stereo strips were off. He had, his incision looked great. So we went right to it. On the other side of things, it just kind of depends on the doc and how versed they are in exercise and just kind of how open-minded they are really in the end. I mean, if you get somebody that's willing to just kind of listen to you and hear a little bit about the science and read some articles that you give them, they tend to get interested. What's been interesting is the age of the physician seems to matter too. Like, so we've had recently, for whatever reason, an influx of youngish podiatrists. And so they come in the office and we're chatting with them and they see these things hanging on IV poles getting wheeled around. And they're like, what the hell is that? Mm-hmm. And so it obviously starts a conversation and they go, well, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that. So most of them have not heard of it already. It tends to kind of come from us. And then it sort of snowballs. Like, I've been getting orthopedists sending me in the direction of other physical therapy clinics that they refer to in different areas and kind of connecting me with them. So it's been fun to just kind of see how it snowballs and who's talking about it to who and who you end up getting a call or a text or an email from. So
any total hips?
I had a guy, a firefighter guy a while back that was a youngish total hip. He had an injury that ended up resulting in this really arthritic condition in his hip that advanced fast, like over a year and a half or so. And for whatever reason, they had a hard time figuring out what was going on with his leg. And so hence his leg just kind of atrophied and wasted away. I think when I measured his girth at his initial visit, he was like 1.5 inches different because he'd been walking around on this arthritic hip for, a year. And so here he was in my place and we had just gotten going with BFR and I'm like, well, man, I got the thing for you. Like, we can get that muscle back.
Yeah. And
in a month, we got all his girth back. I remeasured his girth and I sent it off to the doc and I'm like, holy crap, this is now.
Yeah.
That was an extreme example. Don't get me wrong. Like, right. He was a youngish guy. I pushed him pretty hard and we got after it. But so that one total hip for sure, man, he did fantastic. And he was ecstatic because he's a firefighter and he's going back to work.
Yeah. Man. So Ben, when I know a lot of the listeners, if I put my home health hat on, I'm thinking about all the things that could go wrong.
Right.
Safety, infection rates. I don't want to hurt this person. They're homebound already, blah, blah, blah. So what are some general kind of contraindications? Who is this not appropriate for?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, just like a lot of things that we do, there are some people that it's not appropriate for. And really the biggest thing for us right now, especially with that, geriatric home health kind of population, would be, all the comorbidities that come along with it, like, peripheral vascular compromise or severe hypertension and things like that are on the list of contraindications right now for tourniquet use. And that's coming from use in the OR. That's where our list of precautions and contraindications come from, just because that's where more of the literature is available. But the easiest way, for us to help determine if someone's appropriate is, if someone's gone in and had an orthopedic surgical procedure, they were under tourniquet at a much higher pressure for a lot longer. So we feel pretty comfortable with, anyone that's gone under tourniquet for surgery, they should fit for BFR. Outside of that, we're still waiting on some more of the research for people that have that, more severe peripheral vascular compromise or some nerve issues or things like that, where sensation might be an issue, and we're still waiting on some of those answers to come around.
Okay. Matt Bethune, he is a member of the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group. He was asking about contraindications in older adults, but he mentioned like those with blood thinners. So let's say someone's on Lovenox or whatnot after surgery. Are they okay, you think, to do BFR?
It would be one of those situations for me. If I have a question about whether or not someone is safe, I try and get an answer from their physician about, what kind of history of clotting they have, because that would be another contraindication on my list, is if they've had recent, DVT or PE or something like that. And, if the Lovenox is there prophylactically, how concerned would the physician be about this short-term occlusion? And really, would they feel safe with this person doing a kind of vigorous exercise session? Because looking at the changes that happen, hemodynamically with occlusion and this BFR, the rise in blood pressure and the rise in heart rate are pretty minimal and compare pretty similarly to our light load exercise. It doesn't get up near, any of that heavier load exercise as far as the changes in blood pressure or heart rate. So if they feel comfortable with this person being pushed with harder exercise, then it's probably, again, a pretty safe application.
What if they're drinking alcohol?
That sounds like a great combination.
Why wouldn't they be drinking alcohol?
That's a better question.
So Kyle, kind of give people a glimpse of what a typical session would look like. Let's say you got an older adult. Let's kind of get away from the surgical candidate, the person that's had a joint replacement. But let's say you have an older adult that is just generally weak, lower extremity weakness, pretty symmetrical with that weakness. Just walk us through like a typical session in terms of like type of like a set rep scheme. How do you determine dosage and just things along those lines?
So as far as dosage goes, Dustin, I'm usually going to use an OmniRes RPE scale. I have a little spreadsheet that I put together where I can just kind of jot down the exercises, the limb occlusion pressure that we're going to use, the pressure that we're going to exercise at. And then I've got on there the RPE scale. And so I can kind of show it to them and say, okay, well, when you lift this, how hard is it for you to lift it? And generally speaking, I want them to be within like a 2 or a 3. And that typically will kind of get me in the ballpark to introduce the exercise. And I'm probably not, like in the clinic, I'm probably not pushing that person as hard as I will initially, as I will at the end. So ultimately, I want to get them as close to muscular failure as I can, to where they can do rep 75, not rep 76, or failing a little bit earlier in that. So, which kind of leads into that rep set scheme you asked about. So just a typical isotonic exercise, whether it be a single joint or a multi-joint, we're going to use a rep set scheme of 30 reps, 30 seconds rest, and then 3 sets of 15 with 30-second rest intervals. And I'm looking for them to really be toast by rep 75. But you have to kind of, coach your patient and kind of work them up to that point, especially usually like your older clientele, if they haven't had any sort of history of exercise at all. That's where, the soft skills kind of come in a little bit. And usually I'll start with one exercise, so maybe it's a knee extension. If it was bilateral, I might even say, all right, let's pedal the bike a little bit. Let's do a little bit of a bike protocol, because we've got a few different studies showing the ability to add muscle size as well as improve VO2 max just from pedaling a bike at a low level. Or you can even do walking. I've got an Alter G. One of the first kind of crazy things I did was like, how do I get a person in the Alter G with BFR? Because that could be really fantastic. And so I rigged it up and kind of figured it out. Actually, the Alter G guy was in the clinic fixing the Alter G, and I was talking to him about like how do we engineer this? And then we kind of figured out, oh crap, man, we just stick this on there and shove it down and it's good. So, so that worked great.
That's probably his exact words too. That's how he thought it out.
Yeah, I'm not going to get to the detail there. Yeah, exactly. Good old Redbeard, and his.
Yeah.
So let's say you've worked with someone for a while, and it's towards the end of the course of care. So are you going to apply BFR to say like knee extensions, and then maybe do like a leg press, and maybe even on the bike? Like, are you doing multiple exercises where you're going to be using restriction?
Yes. So we'll link exercises together. Generally speaking, I want to try to fatigue out a muscle group, and if I can get there with one exercise, then I want to get there with that exercise and then move on to a different muscle group. So most of the research is on single joint exercise, but there is a fair amount on multi-joint as well. So like for like a typical session where somebody's been kind of introduced and they're ready to go and are really working with it, I might start them with the knee extension and then go to a ham curl and then go to a total gym. You could do bilat squat or you could do a single leg squat, either one. And sometimes it depends on like what equipment's available, really. And the God's honest truth in the clinic where things are going fast, it's like, oh, so nobody's on the total gym. Let's go do that. So that's just how things go, and that's the reality. No matter you're doing BFR or you're just rehabbing people. On the side of just as somebody's kind of advancing through their rehab process, I mean, we're going to move away from BFR whenever we can. And get them to start loading heavy, because the reality is they're gonna, it's just like the old adage of, look, at the pool is great, but at some point you got to get out and live on land. The reality is you're going to go to the gym hopefully afterward, or you're going to at least start kind of walking on land and having to load your system. And so we have to kind of build that load tolerance eventually. So you might use BFR at the end of that heavier loading session to kind of just really smoke their leg or arm or what have you, but you should see sort of a progression from your light loaded occluded exercise to your heavier loaded stuff.
Yeah, that's helpful for me, just to, just reading the stuff and talking with you all. I get really excited about BFR, but to hear how it's implemented and how at which phase of the game are we going to use this stuff. So it's cool to hear. Ben, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Kyle pretty much hit it there, and the heavier load for us is still our gold standard, really, for strength and hypertrophy. The BFR is just really acting as a way to bridge the gap. When you don't have a way to load heavy and you don't have those more functional exercises available, BFR seems to be a really great way to make more change with that light load stuff than what we have traditionally. And then once we're able to load, then we want to load people. I mean, again, that's functional. That's real life. That's what people are going to be doing outside of the clinic. So that's what we're trying to get back to.
Yeah. So what's the current state of the research right now in terms of an older adult population, in terms of research that's underway or, down the pike or even has been completed?
There are some good studies out there already, just looking at things like that protein synthetic rate response with older adults, looking at, patients or people that are 65 years and up, and looking at what kind of protein synthesis changes you can make with a light load versus a light load with BFR. And it seems like that light load with BFR kind of wins across the board as far as protein synthesis, whether we're talking about younger folks or older folks. And same idea for making strength and size changes. If you're only comparing the light load versus the light load with BFR, in all the physiology studies that we've come across, the light load with BFR seems to win. And that's the great thing is, BFR is not something new. It's been around for decades. So the physiology side of the house has a ton of data out there. So it's great for us to already have a lot of these kind of physiology pathway studies that are in place that can help us explain what's happening and why.
Okay. So Kyle, when I see my patients tomorrow, I've got a patient that had a total knee replacement. I mean, I can just take my gait belt and just, wrap it around their leg and pull it as tight as possible, right? I mean, that's all I need to do. right?
You could, Dustin. You absolutely could do that. I don't know that it would be the best way to go about doing it. It's not the way I would teach you to do it.
Yeah.
But you could do that if you wanted. Yeah. We had.
You're what were you
Go
gonna
ahead,
say?
man. Yeah. So
I was going to say that you were just saying that because Johnny's probably going to listen at some point.
That's probably true too. Yeah. Yeah. Let's just get it all. Let's get it all out there, like the reality. Yeah, man. I just think that if there's kind of a right way and a wrong way to do things, and it's not that that's totally wrong, and it's not that there's not any research to say, hey, you can't do BFR with a band or what have you, but if you are going to practice in the best way possible, I mean, the reality is you want to determine someone's limb occlusion, and you want to work at a percentage of that limb occlusion. You want to use a tourniquet that can get to that limb occlusion in an efficient way. And so you need something that's shaped like the limb, that's adjustable, and that's wide, because we know that those narrower cuffs, they take a lot more pressure to get to the level of occlusion you need to see the changes that we want to facilitate when we do BFR. So never mind that, if something were to go wrong, heaven forbid, if something were to go wrong, you're just exposed. I mean, if you're restricting someone's blood flow, the FDA has already kind of come out and said that's a medical procedure. You have to have a medical license to go through the certification course and be able to use the device that we teach with. And so you've just kind of left yourself open to maybe even lose your license. I don't know, get sued. Any of those just god awful things that could happen if you weren't practicing in the fashion that we know to be the best way possible. Yeah. So, but
what kind of dog you have?
You could do it. He's an American Bulldog. Can you see him?
Tip this. Oh my God.
Isn't he massive?
That's not surprising given your bald head and your massive beard. You should have an American.
They say you look like your dog, and I think I kind of fit that bill. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I've been told that a number of times.
Ben, tell us about the device that you all teach with, and you.
Yeah, so the device that we use is made by Delphi Medical, which is they're out of Canada, and from my understanding, they had been doing some work with the military. And when Johnny was kind of starting to implement and have the idea of implementing BFR for some of the patients there at the Center for the Intrepid, he went to the researchers there and talked to them about it and made sure, for one, that it was something that made sense and had some validity to it. And also, the big question, like you mentioned earlier, was safety. How do we do this safely, and what do we use, and how do we make this as objective as possible? And so they said, you have to use these devices that meet all the same standards as what's used in the OR. There's a reason physicians aren't using voodoo bands and knee wraps to tie people off for surgeries. And so, they really limited the options. They were already working with Delphi on advancing some tourniquet stuff for the military. And so he had the Delphi device available, and they kind of upgraded it and updated it to make it more specific to this application for blood flow restriction, and kind of take it a little bit away from that OR setting. So it's like Kyle was saying, it's got these big wide tapered cuffs. So we're increasing the amount of contact it has with the skin and decreasing some of those pressure gradients that you would see from applying this tourniquet device to a limb. The biggest risk out there with tourniquet use seems to be nerve injury. And nerve injury, seems to be related to high pressure gradients and long duration. So, limiting the risk for that is kind of the more important thing with those wide cuffs. And then it has to do things like inflate and deflate quickly. We have to take this ultrasound Doppler measurement of occlusion pressure to figure out how much pressure it takes to cut off blood flow into a limb. So we know when we're applying that percentage that it's very specific to that person and it's individualized. And we can set timers on the device, so that way, if you are busy in a clinical setting and you have to walk away from your patient, that after this allotted period of time, it's going to deflate automatically, and they're not just going to stay under occlusion for this extended period of time.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty handy application compared to, even when I was an intern there, starting with just the OR system and using that handheld Doppler and having it sound like an OB clinic every time you walk in. So
that's wild. Kyle, all right. Bailey said, how can we do it in the home care setting for minimal cost? So Kyle, in the clinic, we can talk about cost, but I want to hear about practicality.
Sure.
How practical is this for, say, the person in the rehab facility in the SNF? Which I imagine if you're using an outpatient clinic, it can probably be used in a SNF. But what about home care? Is it mobile? Can you get in and out of a vehicle? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really ideal for that scenario, because if you just have some elastic band and some cuff weights, the device is, I don't know, it's similar to like I'm trying to relate it just in terms of stuff I see in my house right now in my kitchen, and all I have is a 40-ounce beer bottle. It's not that narrow, but it's similar to my little half growler that I have. So it's definitely, in terms of size, it's really easy and portable. When I go out and I'm showing different clinics BFR and using the device, I put it in my camera bag, and everything fits in there really nice and neat. The cuffs, the little limb protection sleeves that we have, the charging cord, it all goes in there really good. And of course the tubing that goes from the device to the cuff. In our office, we just have it on IV poles, so we cart it around. So as far as the sniff goes, you would just put it on an IV pole and roll it wherever you needed it. But in the home environment, yeah, man, you could cart that with you, no problem. You got a multi-gym in your camera bag.
Wow.
So I think the home area is really kind of that untapped market, honestly. Like, to see you guys start doing it would be fantastic. It'd be awesome. Yeah.
And I think about that a lot in terms of how useful it would be, because there are several people that, they really can't handle the mechanical load that's really going to stimulate adaptation, or I shouldn't say not able to handle it, but it's difficult to load them to a point of adaptation. But I feel like, BFR could be super helpful, even with like walking. I mean, I saw some of the studies just with restricting blood flow, just with ambulation, just like, my gosh, because there are some people that, if we're going to talk about, like, say, dementia, for example, I just cannot get some people to, perform a specific exercise in a way that, we would want to perform it for it to be beneficial, but they'll walk all over the place,
Right. Yep.
We could restrict blood. Granted, I don't know how they would respond to the burn, if you will. But it just makes me think of some of those situations where, the kettlebell or dumbbell or whatever it is not able to be used, or, TheraBand for that matter. Ben, what's the cost situation now? What'd you say?
I could just see somebody at home with the tourniquet cuffs on and the respirator just going to town, Like, you walk in and they have no idea what's about to happen.
Yeah, they don't. Just watching The Price is Right, just wheeling away. No clue.
Yeah.
Ben, what's the cost situation now? I know when I talked to Johnny a while back, I know they were really pricey, but I know there's some options now. So what's the current state of the finances with getting these devices?
Yeah, the overall cost of the device hasn't really changed. It's still sitting, just below $5,000. So it's pretty similar to like an ultrasound and e-stem combo for the clinic. So it's, there are some options as far as leasing and rental and things like that now that make it more of a monthly payment as opposed to, a $5,000 outright purchase, which is a little easier for a lot of people to justify. And it's hard for a lot of clinics, let alone folks that work in, home health that are maybe footing more of the bill themselves to justify paying that much outright for a device. So, The lease option seems to be a way for people to, make it a little bit more attainable and have a payment schedule on it that's not crushing them all at once.
Yeah, that's a good point. So this next question actually comes from my wife, who thinks Kyle's beard is epic. She said, "Kyle, you kind of made me jealous, man." I'm not gonna
no,
lie.
I can tell it's making my day, brother.
So Megan Jones, she asks, "What about BFR really gets your blood pumping?" Pun intended. She's a corny person. So
let me start this off by saying earlier we had a Facebook discussion about hair growth on the limb when it's being exercised, and I just kind of said, well, currently taking the LOP of my neck. So potentially I might have hair in like 3 or 4 months in the beard.
Right.
More epic, Megan. So
oh my gosh, I'm not gonna let her communicate with you ever again. No.
Yeah. Contrary to popular demand, a lot of people are looking for that device that you can put around the neck for that total body occlusion effect.
Yeah. Right.
That's still frowned upon as far as
I don't know
as much as everyone wants to do it.
So let's say, like, you all have been really heavy in the sports performance world. You all have been featured on, it seems like, every major news outlet. We were at CSM, Ben, and I think that day you were in, what was the article?
Oh, it was the New York Post. There's a guy named Drew Morkos over on the West Coast that had been working with Carmelo Anthony.
Okay.
So
yeah.
There was a
right, and you were quoting that. That was super cool to see. So, like, you all have been in that world, but when we're talking about, the geriatric population and its applications, what gets your blood pumping? What gets you excited? Where do you what's your vision of the potential that this can have in this population? We'll let Ben go first, and then Kyle.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I like to think that the bigger application is getting into that geriatric and sarcopenic population, because that's a vast majority of rehab for physical therapists is with that population, whether you're an outpatient or home health or SNF or whatever the case may be. And thinking about the potential there, because as we get older, we know we don't use fast twitch fibers as well. We don't do things like protein synthesis as well as when we're younger, and we don't have as much of that gene expression going on. So it's harder to stimulate those big changes. And it seems like BFR may be a way to help that process. There's some good articles out there already from the physiology community showing those kind of adaptations in a geriatric population. There's a article out there from the Journal of Geriatric Physical Therapy that was just walking on a treadmill, with occlusion on both legs. And at the end of their study, the control group just doing walking by itself had no change, and the BFR group had a strength change, both knee extension and knee flexion, had hypertrophy of the thigh, and they improved functional stuff like sit to stands and timed up and go. I mean, if you can do one application and get that kind of improvement, that's huge.
Right.
Now, that's a very effective use of your time. So, I hope that we can, get enough information to say that it's safe across the board, and these are the parameters to use, and in the not too distant future, have more application available for those folks that are a little bit older that might have some of those comorbidities that we're not sure about yet.
Yeah. What about you, Kyle?
I think, it's funny, Dustin, since I knew we were coming on with you, I kind of went to your website and I was looking around, and there was an article on there by a doctor. Was it barbell medicine or something?
Yeah, Dr. Sullivan with starting strength.
Yeah. And so I was reading it, and he just kept talking about apoptosis and growth factors and their importance and how they relate to the older population lifting heavy. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool, because we have data to show that this happens when you do BFR. And so, I think I would kind of also follow that up with a question of, well, how important is one's muscle mass to one's health long term? And what do we see change chronically if somebody can maintain or improve that muscle mass? Just whether it be on the side of the cardiovascular fitness, or it just be on the side of their ability to get up and down and, go get a drink if they want to, instead of have to wait for somebody to bring it to them. Right. So I think just in terms of the benefits for an older person's health, it could be really pretty cool to see where someone would take this that was working with folks in that type of an environment. Mm-hmm. My people, they have to come into the clinic. And so most of them have some sort of ability to kind of get around. But if it were really kind of beginning to be used in the environment you work in, it might be neat to see that person kind of come into the clinic and be like, yeah, I've been doing BFR already with Dustin. I'm like, cool, let's get after this. Maybe we need to BFR. Maybe we need to go in the gym and lift heavy. Yeah. But yeah, I just think, more than anything, just the ability to have some positive effects on someone's health by giving them another window to getting a little bit more fit and releasing some of those growth factors that might help attenuate that programmed cellular death, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. My wife will be pleased with those answers.
Nice.
Just to let you know.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I'm excited to see its application. And I haven't got to go to a course yet. So all my excitement is, surely based on just interacting with you all and reading the research studies, and especially my preparation for that CSM talk. Man, the research was just awesome. And just to see its potential use, if we can do it in a safe manner, which it seems like we can, and we're narrowing down, who it's appropriate for. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I know there's going to be some listeners that are going to want to try this stuff, but before you just go and pull your gate belt around someone's limb, you do need to take a course. You do need to learn how to use this device. So you can learn more about that at owensrecoveryscience.com. You can find where all the courses are, where these lovely gentlemen will be teaching them, along with the infamous Johnny Owens. And you can learn from these people and how to actually apply it. Zach Long, he teaches as well, right? The barbell physio.
Yep.
So yeah, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I'll have a link to Kyle and Ben's Twitter handles as well. Ben, did you step your Twitter game up yet?
I'm still working on it. I've been trying to figure out how to be more social media inclined. I went from one social media account to I have 4 now.
Man, that sounds terrible.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and I've got the lowest number of followers of anyone I've ever met. But yeah, I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure it out. So hopefully people get more excited about some of the pictures from the courses, and I'll get some more followers here.
All right. So people, if you have questions for Ben or Kyle, that look in the show notes, there's going to be a link to their Twitter handles. You can ask them on there. owensrecoveryscience.com is where you can find more information about the courses, and you can listen to my previous interview with Johnny Owens. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it, and it was good to have a little drink with you. I'm about finished.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you enjoy this content, I highly encourage you to go to seniorrehabproject.com, where you can find more helpful episodes, lots of free resources, and to see how you can become a game changer and influence the direction of this movement. I appreciate you, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky. This podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. I know what many of you are thinking. Why pay for a course when I can watch a PowerPoint presentation and get free CEUs through my employer? But how many times do you leave energized or equipped with the latest evidence and even a game plan for how to better serve your patients the next day? Check out Great Seminars and Books and one of their many courses ranging from total joint arthroplasty to comprehensive rehab strategies for the geriatric patient. See how you can get $25 off a live course by going to seniorrehabproject.com/great. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Jaros Collective, a podcast network that's redefining old and equipping healthcare clinicians to better serve our aging population. Find out more at GEROScollective.com.